So with that, let me quickly invite our speakers. I believe they're all seated here, all set. So first up, to spearhead the session, we have with us Mr. Nath Parameshwaran, Senior Director, Corporate Affairs, India and South Asia, PayPal. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us this evening. Joining Mr. Nath, may I please invite Mr. Srivatsan Sridhar, co-founder and CEO, Skydo. May I further invite Mr. Vishnu Chalam, Head of APAC Engineering, Stripe India. And may I also please invite Mr. Rahul Kothari, Chief Business Officer, Razorpay. Can we have a finale, like a round of applause to welcome our final set of speakers for our final discussion? And let's deep dive into it. I'm going to request Mr. Parameshwaran to take it over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I know this is the last session of the day. You have had a long day. So we'll try our best to keep it crisp, but also engaging. The topic itself is pretty fascinating, as you see. Over the years, I think PCI, all the forums, we have heavily focused on domestic payments, all the innovation, the scale, the depth, the breadth that we have kind of covered in the domestic payments market. It's one of those huge success stories around the globe. What we are going to talk today is adding a very new, very interesting dimension, where I think it's an absolutely, probably on opening day of the test match, just the beginning, the covers are out, the innings is about to be played. We are going to talk about the digital trade, e-commerce-led export of goods and services, and what can payment providers bring to the table in terms of growing Indian exports, as well as how do we enable Indian consumers to buy stuff from global merchants which they don't find in India. So this is digital trade in a true sense, with the focus being on SME, small value exports of goods and services. Just to kickstart this, we are in a really special place as far as India is concerned, with all the tailwinds with us in terms of digital trade explosion can be, kind of viewed upon. So there are some very key pillars. One, an economy that is really growing very fast, among the exceptions in the world. Okay, going almost at 6% plus. Most important, if you have noted, last year, FY22, the final numbers are yet to be out, but we had record exports. Both the twin engines of services exports and merchandise exports are slated to cross $760 billion. Number three, I don't know how many of you track this, but we do. Okay, India is a leader in small value online services exports. Okay, the entire freelance community led by Indian freelancers doing IT, ES work overseas. Number two, the wellness and edutech sectors led by our women entrepreneurs delivering edutech services, wellness services to the globe. Okay, this is again kind of, firing on all cylinders. We are the number one in services exports, small value online, followed by Bangladesh and Pakistan. So that is something again that is going for us. Fourth, again, foreign trade policy, 2023. Okay, I don't know how many of you seen it. It's like a corporate call to action. The government has set out an export target of $3 trillion by 2030. Very clear targets. And within that, if you see, they have earmarked clearly $300 billion of e-commerce-led exports. Okay, again by 2030. So it's like a corporate boardroom target set by the leadership in the country to say that this is what our export vision is. Now, the last one, which is kind of again going to help us jumpstart this whole revolution, is the DPI, right? The digital public infrastructure, UPI, not just dominating India, but going global. We have got ONDC that is making waves already in the domestic market. Why can't it disrupt and democratize e-commerce worldwide? So that's the second engine. You already have Aadhaar, account aggregator, all that working. So with that kind of background, here is a panel, my friends here, each company and each of these founders and leaders, doing some great work in this space. So we thought, why don't we come together and, discuss some aspects of this cross-border digital trade. So with that, I'll just start, not in any particular order. Rahul, a quick introduction, and then I can throw the question at you.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. I'm Rahul. I'm CBO at Razorpay. And Nath has been a great partner with us, with a strong partnership between Razorpay and PayPal. So I will give my views on how this entire cross-border businesses and what are some of the challenges that we see for a lot of our customers. So first, just set a context. We have seen tremendous growth in cross-border business in last 2 to 3 years, and it's very synced with what Nas spoke about is overall growth that we are seeing in both exports and imports. In fact, the kind of growth is such that 2 to 3 years back, we had almost non-existent cross-border business, and now it's almost 15% of our overall business. So if I look at the different challenges of SMEs from a cross-border perspective, I think there are very clear 3 segments of different customers which see the challenges. One is B2C businesses, one is B2B businesses, and third is the import businesses. Now, B2C businesses are typically like these small online merchants who are selling saris or jewelries online to some of these other geographies like US, Europe, etc. So they have very different, unique kind of challenges. Say these guys are, let's take example of one of the jewelry store. This person has a good online presence with a lot of business in India, and now he or she wants to open it in some of the other geographies. The first problem is, how do they establish that trust? Like, for example, in Europe, by a jewelry store है कौन? कोई जानता नहीं है. So first point is how to establish that trust. Say once they are able to overcome that, the next is what are different payments mode that can be used to make payments. In India, like we have cards and then we have UPI. UPI is a very India-specific payment instrument. Similarly, Baki geographies may also very similar kind of that's country-specific instrument. So how do you get access to those kind of payment instruments is the second biggest problem that they face. Now let's assume उन्होंने offline, उन्होंने international चालू कर दिया, सब हो गया, transactions हो रहे हैं, and then the third major problem hits them, which they don't even see it coming unless they're well educated. Frauds. In India, with the second factor authentication, still frauds are less, but as soon as they go international, suddenly the fraud rates go very high, they don't know what to do about it. Now, even suppose this is done, the fourth major challenge it hits, compliance bhi karna hai, right? Like FIRC, FIRA, all those things. Typically, all of these customers don't know well enough. So these are typically the challenges for B2C customers we have seen, and we have multiple ways through which we solve for it. Like the first point I talked about trust. We have something called Razorpay, kind of trusted brand, which we put it on their checkouts and kind of helps them establish trust. Then about the different global currencies, in which not different global payment instruments in which they can accept payments. We have some large partnerships where we enable them to kind of accept in global currencies across Australia, in Europe, in US, and those places. Compliance, we've automated a lot of stuff like FIRC. From fraud perspective, we have like strong fraud engines, chargeback engines, which helps them kind of manage that. But that is kind of, in general, I've seen over last 2 years for B2C businesses, the journey has improved a lot because a lot of changes happened to make it seamless. I think still a lot of problem which still continues to be in the B2B segment. B2B segment, the biggest problem is simply transparency of it. Like, if you're a small merchant, first of all, none of the financial institutions actually focus on small businesses for the cross-border business. If you have some payment coming from, say, US, transparency is the first part they don't have. Like, if you have done it ever, आपको पता नहीं है कब वो ट्रांजैक्शन आपके पास पैसा आएगा, क्या फॉरेक्स एक्सचेंज होगा, nothing they're aware of. So I think that transparency itself is one of the biggest problem. Second is also about the cash flow management, and we were discussing earlier in the panel as well. The money would come in 7 days, 14 days, it becomes a big cash flow problem. So at least those are the bigger ones, and even include things like payment modes. SWIFT is not a very intuitive, good, easy payment modes to be used by the pay from the other geography locations. So some of these are major challenges we have seen, and some of the ways to solve is through automation and all of those things that we have done over the last couple of years. And again, the journey continues.
Thanks, Rahul. Let me come to Vishnu now. Stripe doesn't need any introduction. Vishnu runs Stripe, their businesses across the markets here. Vishnu, I just wanted a question to you that, you are a global player, you have a global network, you have been providing export services to Indian SMEs and also global merchants. So how do you see the Indian, digital trade ecosystem shaping up? And the next question would be, what are some of these global products or best practices that you have been able to bring to India?
Thanks for the question. Can you all hear me? Good? Cool. So, our mission at Stripe is to increase the GDP of the internet. And when you think about it, bringing more businesses online and enabling them to transact online is a core part of how we achieve that mission. And when we talk to our users, implying the businesses that need payment services, the problems that we hear, especially MSMEs in India face, are no different than what we hear across the world. There are primarily four vectors that our users ask us about. The first is what we call as pay-ins. I need the ability to accept payments in multiple currencies in a compliant way. If there's a buyer in Japan, I want to be able to accept Konbini. If there's a buyer in Thailand, I want to be able to accept payments in PromptPay. So, by working with a company like Stripe, they're able to access close to, 135 plus payment methods, currencies across 35 plus countries. So that is, what like global players can offer. Then the second thing that our users ask us about is, what we call as treasury management. I'm collecting money in different currencies. How do I manage the movement of money between these currencies? How do I make sure that, I'm storing this money in a compliant way? And how do I hedge against the FX risk, essentially? That's a huge problem that users have been work with us on. The third is payouts. I might want to pay out for Facebook ads in USA, in USD, and maybe in Germany and Euro. So how do you enable these multiple currency payouts in a compliant and low cost way? And then the last one is around, complying with regulations. Different countries and even different jurisdictions and say each of these countries have a lot of complexity with tax codes, with, how you accept payments, so on and so forth. So increasingly, like MSMEs, they want to focus on what they do best. Like if I am an MSME who's manufacturing saris, I want to spend all my IQ on, manufacturing the best design, the highest quality saris, and not worry about, the complexity of managing payments. So that's where, we come in and we've been able to help a wide range of companies, be it a tribal collective out of Andhra Pradesh that is selling cosmetics across the world, to some very big players like Zoho who use us for payments across the world. So across the board, what we see are very similar problems, albeit the scale probably changes. And then one very important trend that is emerging right now, especially in the APAC market, is this interconnectedness of real-time payment rails across geographies. So this has been kickstarted primarily by the MAS in Singapore in partnership with the Bank of International Settlements through a project called Nexus, where in the first leg, they've connected Singapore, Malaysia, and Europe. And they're actually also now looking to increase the coverage of these sort of interconnected platform, if you will. So you can imagine now, Indonesia, Thailand, and joining this ecosystem, which will essentially make each of these real-time payment networks interconnected. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, especially when we think about India. And I think NPCI is already involved in working with Nexus. But I really believe that technology and regulator-led solutions of that nature will be game changers because our users really want real-time settlement in a frictionless, ubiquitous payment methods that have very low risk. So we really see trend move towards more real-time payments and settlement at Stripe. Yeah.
Excellent, Vishnu. I think Rahul touched about trust. You touched about coverage. How do we connect to global international platforms to help the merchants manage the complexity, especially around treasury. How do we quickly convert from invoice to cash? With that, I think Srivatsan, runs cross-border B2B startup Skydo. The interesting bit, about Sri is that, he himself, as a family business, ran a manufacturing SME, still runs that, saw the pain points that, his business faces, and now he has decided to not just help his business, but, run this as a business model itself to help other SMEs. So, Sri, Skydo, you are coming from this very, very efficient B2B solutions for the small SMEs who want to go global, get payments in a very frictionless manner. From your lens, how do you see the potential, the challenges, and what are you trying to do differently in this space, in terms of value-added services to the SME?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and hello everyone. So I'm Srivatsan. I'm founder CEO of a cross-border B2B payments company that is much younger than everybody else around here, Skydo. So we started about a year back, and the way we thought about this market was there are, so I think consumer payments started modernizing first, right? I mean, obviously with industry leaders like PayPal. But after that, gradually, business payments have also started, getting modernized. But still, we are like, Nath said in the beginning, early stages of the game here. The way we looked at it was, if a small company in India wants to accept payments, they have broadly two options, right? One is they can use a platform which typically is built on a credit card rail, or they can use, a Swift type of a payment platform, which is, again, cumbersome, a little bit old-fashioned. I feel that banks are terrific in the fact that they've built rails. However, as like in everything else that we are all today used to experiencing, whether it is in consumer products or other apps that we use, the product experience is critical right now, and I think that's an area where probably banks haven't yet been able to score, and that's the gap that I think platforms and technology companies who are very vertical focused can look at and solve for. So one such vertical that we thought we should solve for is the slightly larger sized, B2B payments, where we feel that while, e-commerce is growing very fast and platforms are growing very fast, bulk of the business between businesses even today happens offline, or rather, bilaterally. So there is a supplier in India selling software or selling digital marketing services to a customer, somewhere else in the world, or like in the case of my family business, selling manufactured auto components, or textiles or garments, or pharma ingredients and so on. So in these cases where the ticket size is not yet in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and also not so small that credit card payments and platform payments are still okay, what do you do, right? So are you okay to pay the 2-3% costs that are associated with the end-to-end bank flows or credit card flows? That really doesn't work, because then it really adds up to a lot over a year. That's one. Secondly, there are other gaps around the payments. So payments is one part, but around payments there are other things like, someone talked about trust. I think authentication itself is a problem, right? So who are you, are you who you say you are, both on the customer side and the supplier side. Is your bank account, really valid? If I enter this bank account number and Swift code, is it actually going to reach you? That handshake is actually quite, vague and open-ended, and it's not really easy to establish. So authentication. After authentication, there is, selecting the right payment option, then tracking during the process. Once the tracking is done, then reconciliation. And finally, multiple newer use cases that have come in today. So the world is no longer simple that, someone raises an invoice and someone wires a payment. We spoke about, pay-ins and payouts. I think if you think about a business that is there today, I'll give you an example. One of our customers, has business in India. They are an AI ML company. That means they support AI ML work for startups in Germany and in the US. They are extended tech teams of these large companies. They get they raise invoices and they get paid. And they raise invoices in different ways. For some projects, they raise invoice as a monthly invoice. For some other, they raise invoice as milestone payments. For a different set of customers, they raise invoice as recurring SaaS payments, and so on. So already you can see there is much more complexity than a simple invoice payment. Then they have some employees who are sitting in Eastern Europe and coding, or who are sitting in Nepal and coding. So they have payouts to employees, right? Then they subscribe to various software tools and services for which again they have to pay out. So already you can see that for a small company, life is in an interconnected global world, which is what it is today. There is already multiple modes of payments required and multiple complexities. So where we are trying to solve this problem is, let's look at not the e-commerce, because there is lots of great companies solving for it, and not the really enterprise segment yet, but somewhere in between. And what are these customers actually using, and how can we make their life better? how can we make their payments simpler, transparent, and cost effective?
Thanks, Sri. I think it's fascinating. The point we are trying to highlight here is, there are the whole pie is up there, and there are different parts of the, pie. Different companies who are very good at what they are doing are trying to solve, and you can see this diversity of views, solutions that are coming to cater to different segments. And this is how an ecosystem is truly built out while we address, helping our, SMEs go global. Now, quickly just changing things around and in order, Vishnu, if I may come to you. See, all of us in the room, Payment and Settlement Systems Act, okay? PMLA, I think there are so many discussions that would have happened. When we talk about our sector, there is a third law that comes into the picture, which is FEMA, right? And then brings to the whole aspect and ecosystem that the entire cross-border space today, for a certain reason, India has evolved over the last 50, 60 years with the FEMA regulations. And within that, you have the authorized dealer bank and the FFMCs and the AD2s, the AD1s, all of them having a play. So where I'm coming with this, Vishnu, just to get your perspective, that as we look at growing digital trade, as we look at this $300 billion, dollars export vision of the government, right? The regulator supporting in their own way, smoothing out things with the regulatory sandbox. What do you think are one or two areas that you think we need help from the regulator or the government to support us and our ecosystem of SMEs?
It's a fantastic question. In fact, that's something that we are also debating very intensely in our company. So one area where I think we can work very closely with the regulator and need a lot of support is bringing more technology to solving these sorts of, what we call as financial crimes or, FEMA sort of regulations. So this amazing innovation happening, especially in the field of AI with, large language models and things that, would not have been possible even 6 months back. We are exponentially better in such things. So really getting the regulators to be comfortable with the application of these types of technologies and partnering with them very closely to, make this more usable. And it's not just the regulator. I think the industry as a whole can also come together and partner on sharing some of these ML models. Because, if we all are operating in a safe environment, I think, rising tide will rise all the boats. All of us stand to benefit from it. So that would be my top ask, if you will. Because right now, the way we see it is there's so much manual processes involved. And when you have a lot of manual processes, there's scope for errors, there's scope for misinterpretation, there's scope for different interpretations of what should be done. But if you can, automate things and share some of that automation, I think it's a win-win for everybody. So that would be the top ask, I would say. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Vishnu, I think you have touched upon one part of it, okay, which is, use of AI, ML, digitization. See, we have made some strides as an industry. Most of the players who issue the exporters today an EFIRA, right, which is Electronic Foreign Inward Remittance Advice or a certificate. Okay, the government has automated, the entire EBRC process, which is E-Bank Reconciliation Certificate, right? These are fundamental documents that an exporter requires to be able to go and claim a GST refund. So digitization is getting there across the ecosystem. But as you said, we can take it to the next level by working closely with the regulator. I think that opportunity which you highlighted about how can we be a part of this whole Nexus framework and, kind of have this ride on this global real-time platform. Rahul, if I may come to you, one very clear aspect that the regulator or policymakers are worried about, see, one leg of the transaction and user base are sitting outside, okay? They follow different jurisdictions. And there are genuine concerns about fraud, okay? How do you redress them, okay? And because of this one set of users sitting in the other geography, of course, the logical concerns about, well-placed concerns about money laundering and terrorist financing come in. What is your perspective on that angle? What can we do as an industry? And do you think there are technology and, coupled with other compliance process that will come to build this trust, right? There's another element of trust that we need to establish.
Sure. So today, primarily from a payments fraud perspective, there are a few things which we do which has significantly helped us to kind of get fraud down. Like, for example, Ali was talking about authentication of payments through kind of two-factor authentication, and some payments which are not second-factor authentication. So I think within that, first as a company, how do we kind of go sequence-wise depending upon what's the merchant profile, what's the customer profile, what you allow and don't allow. Second aspect of it still has been for us primarily from a technology perspective, how do we kind of have far better risk engines which can go through data, do AML, etc., and kind of make it better. So I think primarily from a consumer fraud, the consumer fraud perspective, protecting merchants, and also from merchant fraud perspective, protecting customers, I think it is primarily about the data sharing and how do you kind of work better on that. But I think since we touched upon, right, like what are some of the things which we can engage broadly more with regulator to whether bring fraud down, or rather I will take it back and say what do we do to kind of really make the cross-border payments far more seamless for our customers. I think from that perspective, I think there are 2 or 3 things which I think can really change the entire trajectory of this to take it to the aspiration where we want to go to. First is, I think, from a cross-border perspective, given it's the complex domain with multiple countries, multiple kind of money flows, I sometimes feel the clarity on what is allowed and not allowed sometimes also missing, right? Getting that good clarity will help the companies to go in a far more confident way, putting large investments and kind of pushing it to the next level of growth. Like for example, earlier talking about that SWIFT is not a very good and convenient way of transferring money from abroad to India. Now, there is one way where you can have, say, a global bank account within the local geography, get all the money there, and then kind of transfer back to India. Now, whether it's perfectly kind of allowed or not allowed sometimes always is a question mark, and therefore how much money you put behind to kind of scale it. One is that is something very important. I think second important point is, and we were discussing earlier as well, how do we get a little bit more empowerment for the fintech companies as well, along with bank, to play a more dominant role in this. Earlier talking about like whether, say, a very small role of a AD bank, can it be given to fintech companies by regulator? The way it's happened in PAPG as well, right? Like it is now regulated, but it's a lot of clarity in what a payments company can do versus earlier when it was not regulated. With regulation, a lot of responsibility come, but then you also get a lot of understanding and you can kind of play a lot on front foot. One of examples would be like today fintechs can't directly check the LRS limits. And therefore making the payouts from import perspective becomes far more cumbersome, requires working with other financial institutions, technology might work out seamless or not. So that's, I think, second major thing which can help us to take to the next level. And third and final, I would say, while overall regulation has been very progressive, right? The overall limits in OIC guidelines versus OPGSP has gone up both for import and export. Also coverage has gone more to goods, including services as well. But I think giving the industry view, I would say all these are pretty good directionally. But I think with the aspiration that we have for the growth of this export economy, I think some of those changes has to be far more bigger. Like say changing a limit from $10,000 to $15,000, in OIC versus OPG is 50% increase. But actually, the real thing is for what kind of businesses, what should be the right limit? Like why it should not be $100,000 for certain kind of businesses which require that, right? So I think these are 2 or 3 broad things, I think, which will, once you get a good clarity on regulation, good empowerment, faster moving pace in sync with the way government wants us to grow, and then I think, with the real change would come, and that's how I think about it. Thanks, yeah.
Thanks, Rahul. I think the points you are making is, clarity, the dialogue part which Vishnu mentioned, get this sorted out. Why the limits itself in the first place, right? OPGSP has proven itself over 10, 15 years. It's time come to relook at the limit itself, right? So I think very valid points. I think we have to also bear in mind as an industry, the government is getting into FATF review as a country coming this year. Who is the end remitter and who is the end receiving party? Those are information which the law enforcement for all the right reasons are asking. Okay, we need to find a way to collaborate with our bank partners and the authorities to make sure that the information they are seeking is provided. Because, the trust is a two-way street. Even with the regulators and policymakers, we'll need to work. One last question before we kind of, open some questions for the audience here. Sri, let me come to you in terms of, let's face it today, right? If you want to operate in cross-border, partnership with an authorized dealer bank is a given. That has its pros, but it also has its cons, right? Any perspective on that, how do you see that developing in the years coming forward? Is there a middle path for us to kind of, partner and continue to grow this together?
Yeah, I think in the process of building this business, we have had the opportunity to review the posture that regulators take in different markets. And one thing that I think we can probably learn from and emulate in India is how can we give extreme clarity in the frameworks, but leave the execution a little bit open-ended. So as long as the boundary conditions are very clear that you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, but within this, you take your own calls, is actually the pragmatic way in which some regulators have approached it, and I think it has worked well for them. So in our case also, I feel that while 81 banks are critical in terms of having partnered, having the FX role to play, and in the case of manufacturing export, they also have to close the EBRC and all of those things. I think what that ends up creating is, then it ends up creating a high-speed engine and a very slow coach together, right? Because obviously the bank has 200 different products to sell and lots of different considerations from risk management to enterprise sales and other things. Whereas a particular specialist like a payments aggregator or a payments player is really focused on one sliver. So then these two parties are fundamentally misaligned in incentives, misaligned in objectives, and misaligned in pace of execution. So I think there has to be a certain different way to solve this. Maybe it's around in the lines of the payment institution licenses that Singapore provides. Create a payment institutional framework where very specific set of things can be done, cannot be done, and within that offer more freedom. I think that ultimately it's not for what I'm batting for probably is not for freedom to companies like us, but what I'm batting for is freedom for customers. So let customers actually choose what's the best solution for them in different cases, right? If I'm let's say subscribing to a Netflix-like channel which does not have an India billing, let me use a Stripe or a Adyen or a other credit card processor. If I am using B2B recurring payments, let me use a Skydo type of software which helps me do it. If I'm using something else, let me use a third thing. If I'm doing LRS kind of payment, let me use my bank. So if I as a customer have multiple choices and the regulatory framework allows for that, I think that's win-win for everyone.
Excellent, Sri. Thank you. So differentiated licensing, risk-based approach, allow us to innovate a bit within the guardrails, what is established so that we can actually bring innovation, solutions, friction, convenience to our SMEs and go for this target. So with that, we come to a close on our discussions, probably through this open to the audience. If you have a couple of questions, probably we have time for one. I'm looking at the organizers. Yeah, probably one question. And we will be available offline as well if others, who may have not had the chance to ask us, catch us on the sidelines. Thank you so much. Thanks to... Yeah, yes, thank you so much as very patient listeners. Hopefully this has been productive for you. One question and then we go for the networking session.
Hi, Shraddha here. I would just like to know a little bit more about how all of you are handling the regulatory side of things when it involves cross-border geographies, because just in India, we are facing so many challenges when it comes to fintech and their regulatory implications. What is it like when you are crossing all the borders and going in even like different continental geographies, because UAE will have something different, and in the similar geographic zone, if you are also catering to UK, it will have something different. So I would really like to know about that.
Probably I'll take a little bit of shot at it. Probably Vishnu, you can take a, since it's across the, so Sweta, right?
That's a...
Shweta, no? Shraddha. Shraddha, thank you for the question. Definitely, this will take a whole session, okay? Even this session is not complete. The dimensions that we would kind of cover, okay? So, but let's look at, I tend to look at things from glass is 3/4 full. Let's focus on India for a minute, then probably request Vishnu to take a second geography. See, India, currently the way the regulations are, depending on which side of the, solutioning that you are doing for MSMEs, it's given. You have a FEMA regulation. It requires us to partner with a bank. Okay, the bank is supposed to focus on the regulation in terms of bringing in the money. For example, if it is in exports, issue the documentation, do the foreign exchange conversion. The rules are pretty clear. It allows a very good way, okay, of partnering with a established authorized dealer bank who has been in the system for very long for fintechs like us to make sure we deliver the right service to our SMEs, right? For example, like Sri said or Vishnu said, we focus on user experience, make sure the money is received quickly, okay? They get all the recon, reporting, everything. Okay, as far as the heavy lifting in terms of regulation is concerned, thanks to RBI, the AD framework, the banks do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of complying to the regulation and reporting to RBI. Okay, that's very important. But now let's look at the dimension of the other party being in that country. There are a host of challenges, right? Money moving from there, who is sending it, privacy. For example, you took UK as an example, if I'm right, right? So there is GDPR also to tackle. So probably I'll request Vishnu to provide a glimpse of the other side.
So, at a very fundamental level, right, the question you asked is how do you deal with this complexity, right? That's literally the job to be done for a company like Stripe. That's why customers come to us, they pay us, and, we earn their business by solving these problems. So, at a fundamental level, I'll say you have to have a company culture where you take regulations very seriously and you treat that as a cost of doing the business. It's not something that you add on or you say, oh gee, this is a headache that I have to deal with. You have to look at it, and culturally you have to look at it as this is something we have to do to operate within the limits of the law of the land. And this is us solving a problem for our customers. And I think that sort of a cultural mindset is super important to work on these types of problems. The other thing is that when you actually go deep down into what these regulatory frameworks do, there's a lot of overlap. Like at the end of the day, every government, what do they want? They want to make sure that their borders are secure, that the customers, that their citizens' data is safe and secure, that fraud is very hard to commit, and that if there are people who are breaking the law, that they can be brought to justice. And there is probably depending on the country and the level of freedom that the country has, they want to operate a free market or whatever, right? So there's a lot of overlap in what governments want. So in fact, I would posit that global companies tend to we can reuse the work that we do in one geography in many other places. The other thing is there's a lot of investment into automation, both in terms of how do we validate identity. We bring a lot of AI and ML work into automating identity, automating a lot of workflows, so on and so forth. So that's how we look at overall the problem of compliance and user onboarding and identity management.
Shraddha, if you have a follow-up, I can see you have a follow-up, but please do catch us on the sideline. But let me tell you one thing, okay? I'm talking this from experience and not selling, or talking great about RBI. This is my first-hand experience. Trust me, there are pros and cons of how the regulations are written. Okay, but let me tell you what the regulator has done over last many, many years. In each of those regulations, they have taken the Indian small business interest in mind and the Indian consumers in mind. Okay, just to give you an example, a very concrete example, and we'll finish it. The OPGSP guidelines have been written in such a way that tomorrow any of us can go belly up, okay, when we operate that model. We go out of business, but the exporter's money is actually safe for the exporter with a licensed authorized dealer bank in India. It's beautifully designed, fine balance between innovation and protecting the Indian customer. If you take the consumer side, okay, we might crib about recurring transactions. Okay, it adds a lot of friction, killing my subscription, right? But very deep down, they've actually taken the Indian consumer's interest in mind. Okay, so with that, I think we can close this, but happy to talk to you in detail. Thank you.